Well, ladies and gentlemen, I made the prediction prior that Julius would rule the day that he said all of the rhetoric that he says in the public sphere, and said that that day would come pretty soon. And it has. And it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. But before we get on to the main news story of today, can I yet again remind you, subscribe to the channel. Anyway, let's get on to it. So what's actually happened? Well, the UK government has denied Julius Malema access, a visa if you will, to the United Kingdom, labeling his rhetoric and actions as extremist. And to be honest, the UK government knows everything about being extreme. Just watch anything that they do. It's pretty extreme. In any case, they said that their specific reasons were Julius's constant praise for Hamas, Hezbollah, including support for armed struggles, and his appeared favor for the justification of October 7th. His previous inflammatory remarks, such as kill the Boer, are obviously also considered incitement to violence, all of which were reasons that the UK government said, we don't want you here. So apparently, this criteria was all applied to him because an individual who goes to the UK needs to be deemed a non-extremist before entry. And Julius Malema, according to them, is extreme. So in typical fashion, Julius's response, well, he calls the move a political attack. He accuses it of suppressing free speech. But you see, here's the problem. Is it free speech? One has to ask the question, because every nation has to do security checks. And there is this idea of global free speech, as you know. But at the end of the day, everybody's free speech is limited when it comes through to incitement of violence. Your speech is not free if it infringes on the rights of others. And Julius seems to think it's only his right that matters, but it's not. Anyway, moving swiftly on, and this is the progressing news that apparently Donald Trump stood up Ramaphosa at the G7 talks. Now, as I said in my video yesterday, the actual bilateral trade agreement, also known as AGOA, is due to expire. And they really need to kickstart something because, as you will recall, the reciprocal tariffs are due to kick in within less than a month. So, obviously, South Africa is eager to engage the United States on forms of talks in order to avoid an impasse on duties. Now, these trade duties would apply to South African steel, aluminium, and possibly agricultural products, all of which would be affected underneath the AGOA benefits agreement. So what's actually going to happen? Well, apparently Ramaphosa and Cyril are now scheduled to meet and talk at the US-Africa Business Summit. It does actually look like this can is constantly getting kicked down the road. So these talks are due to begin next week, and they have to finalize a whole trade agreement before the end of mid-May. If you've ever worked in government, you know that that's impossible. Yeah, good luck. Good luck. So in normal fashion, CEOs, farmers, even trade minister, they're all pretty worried because the reciprocal tariffs are due to come in, and that's going to suck. Now, more amusingly, looking at the way South Africa tends to govern its affairs, you may recall that actually when Donald Trump went around doing his whole reciprocal tariffs, what actually tended to happen is that Zimbabwe said, don't worry, we'll drop our tariffs. And they decided to side with America for once. And that was their way of avoiding the big tariff increase. Well, it now appears that the Zimbabwean economy has grown 6% in 2025. A lot of these have been driven by strong gold prices and improved weather for agriculture. It's very curious because you see Zimbabwe is attempting to maximize on the current mining craze going on. But South Africa's mining craze isn't happening because we destroyed mining through Matashi bull rubbish. I've done numerous videos on it. So it's very curious because according to the IMF, the specific progress that has been made is equivalent to a regime change. Obviously, you can't help but contrast this with South Africa because what we're seeing in South Africa is anything but what they're doing in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe's response to diplomacy and diversification is to just demonstrate some form of productivity, show some form of macroeconomic stabilization, and be a little bit more cautious with its optimism in the way that it approaches things globally. In other words, It's not trying to throw its weight around. It's just trying to be an economic force. I say force. Remember, we're basically talking about like a gentle breeze against the side of a skyscraper. It's not really going to do much, is it? But at the end of the day, it's still better than South Africa appears to be doing. Because what South Africa seems to constantly want to do is almost spark forms of moral superiority to others, a form of victim narrative whilst lecturing on virtues. It's really bizarre. But it's also not a way to ingratiate yourselves with foreign countries that may come to your nation and invest. Which is exactly why news out is that actually South Africa has had billions in investment outflows. Billions. And not even billions in funny currency like rand. Billions in dollars. It's a real big shit show. And it's nothing less than South Africa's own making. Moving here swiftly on, news came out that Iran bombed a hospital in Israel yesterday, which injured some civilians. And it's very curious the way that this has been taken up in terms of the media. Because the PM condemns Iran for targeting a hospital, and that's it. Like, no one else has said a thing. But it's very curious the degree of selective outrage which you see in the media. Because we're frequently told when a hospital gets bombed in, I don't know, Gaza or something, wow, that's outrageous. That's a breach of human rights. That's like genocide and stuff. But Iran's bombing a hospital right now in Israel, and everyone's like, if I'd... Talking of selective outrage, let's actually move on to the final news article of today. I actually say news article because it's not actually a news article at all. It's just pure selective outrage in the South African media on full display. Because an article written by the Daily Maverick entitled, Zionism Unfettered, inside the legal battle for the soul of UCT. Now, for those of you who've watched my videos, you'll know that UCT has been doing some very crazy stuff, starting with Hamas and Hezbollah and all sorts of like, proper full-on hardcore Islamist type stuff. And everybody's meant to be like, be fine. Obviously, they've lost a serious amount of US funding because of it. We've covered it in numerous videos. Anyway, this is an article that says that basically in unsealed court documents, it shows a pro-Israeli lobby group which has launched a legal campaign aimed at restricting criticism of Israel at UCT. I doubt that's the case, but anyway, let's see actually what they've got to say. So according to them, this would infringe on their right to academic freedom because of unfettered Zionism. It's academic freedom if they can criticize it. Yeah. But you see, the problem is that when another side counters what you say, you tell them all to shut up, and you have no viewpoint here. You can't have a conversation here. And instead, we're told that what they're really wanting to do is have open discourse, and they don't want to stifle progressive voices on campus. But what these clowns don't seem to understand is that this isn't stifling debate. What they're trying to do is not be stifled in terms of what they say, but they don't care if the other guys shut up. We see this in South African politics all the time. It's a real big problem in South Africa. I'm allowed to say my unfettered bull rubbish, but you can't challenge it. So shut up, bigot. But in any case, what's actually happening here is that a form of alarmist rhetoric is being pushed back by a form of legal dispute. The legal dispute, a legal pushback if you would call it that, is against student resolutions which are showing an ideological shift in the university. A predictable outcome of this was inevitable. This ideological shift, moving towards Islamification of the university itself, siding with one specific lobby group, if you want to call them that, has become problematic because no one else is allowed to talk. If you talk in those environments, you're told that you're not progressive. Remember, don't stifle progressive voices. And that you must be like, I don't know, anti-Islamic and not pro-Palestinian, and therefore shut up and get out, bigot. And the only way to sweep aside any of this is through a legal clash. But it's very curious the way that the Daily Maverick has framed it, because instead of objectively framing what's going on, it took a very one-sided frame. Instead, what they tried to do is demonize the legislative legal strategies as being forms of political warfare. They drummed up a form of academic freedom hysteria, which is nothing more than academic freedom hypocrisy, because the Gaza resolutions themselves are often passed whilst suppressing dissenting voices. This is not for me to say that I side with one side or another. That's got nothing to do with it. But again, if you want to take a principle of academic freedom, then it has to be uniform. You can't pick sides. You can't say my narrative is okay, but yours is not. And if you try to shut me up, well, that's not fair. But if I shut you up, well, that's fair. Because that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call a victim narrative. Constant cry of victimization. And it's bull rubbish. And we need to call out bull rubbish in this country because the victim narrative of everyone just needs to stop. It's just complete horse crap. It just needs to stop. Anyway, that's just my views. Do let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until Monday, bye.
South Africa is what, 75% black? Is that correct? 80%? Maybe.
Yeah,
more?
that's right.
Right. And so explain to me, like post-apartheid, outside of the land ownership, maybe there's a business element. Why is it that once apartheid was removed, why black South Africans were not able to see their material economic net worth go up in the last 20 or 30 years? What do you think there's any, and maybe I don't know enough, are there any cultural inhibitions of a defeatist attitude that has basically, let's say, infected the minds of poor South Africans last 20 years that feel as if they can't accumulate wealth? Do you think that plays a factor?
Yeah, I think what's really infected black South Africans is pretty much going back to what we're talking about. Obviously, from the colonial background that I just gave you, and we see a lot of like neo-colonialism, you control the supply chains, and you own 72% of agricultural farmland. How do you expect the minority, the majority black people to improve their lives and their outcomes when you pretty much control everything?
And so this is a sloppy but best example I can give. Is that fair? I'll do it. So just grant me some mercy here. What percentage of American land is owned by Asians?
Not sure.
Yeah, less than 3%. They are the richest racial group in America. So maybe land ownership isn't the only thing that matters to get wealthy. Land is basically all owned by white people in America, okay? Yet Asians, Indians are by far the richest group. So why is it that this particular group that happens to own the land and the supply chains, and we've admitted it's very hard to run this land, very hard to run this idea of farming in South Africa, it feels to me, I could be wrong, that it's a group of resentment-driven politics towards a group of people that own land instead of opportunity and empowerment-based politics, talking to the black majority about how they could build a better life for themselves instead of taking away other people's stuff. I don't know South African law enough. I don't know if it's a free market-based. I really don't. I'm not just playing cute. But as a general operating principle, it's very bad to build a political movement around taking other people's stuff because you're obsessed with what you don't have instead of the mental energy to create what you want and what you think you deserve. So my postulation, and I'm glad you admitted it, don't say kill the Boers. Bad. We should say that. It has created real deaths and real harm. If I was in charge, which of course I'm not, I would spend all my time not saying kill the Boer, kill the Boer. I would say, my people, get your act together. Let's work harder. Let's prove the Boer wrong. Let's start a business. Let's build families. One is driven in resentment and greed and envy and confiscation, and one is rooted in creation and entrepreneurship and optimism. I'd like to see the latter.
In an England where multiculturalism lies in pieces, Luton exemplifies just how much has gone wrong. This small town, just 20 minutes north of London, has become synonymous to the British media with everything that's wrong with Islam. The other week, an entire family of 12 left this street and headed off to join the caliphate in Syria. This week, 2 men from this boring-looking road were up in court, accused by the police of a plan to blow up a military base. And on the main street, sitting with a coffee, is a convert currently on bail after allegedly distributing leaflets in central London supporting ISIL. So what exactly is happening here? Like many others, Wasim takes his religion seriously. He goes to this conservative Salafist mosque, and it's clear he and Britain don't understand each other at all. You know, this week David Cameron, the Prime Minister, was saying a lot of Muslims don't see themselves as being British. What do you think about that?
No, we don't, because we're not accepted, let's be honest.